Hi guys, welcome back to my channel, The Inked Reader. Today I am wrapping up the month of January. Now I had a very ambitious TBR and as you could have seen from the statistics, unfortunately I just didn't take in consideration how busy I was gonna be in January. So yeah, unfortunately it was a slow reading month for me. It felt very like a bit of a disappointment as first month of the year in terms of reading. However, when I then went and compiled this list from least enjoyable to the most enjoyable read, I realized that I actually ended up reading 10 things, which is better than initially I thought. I thought I'd read 5 things. And before I start, I want just to mention a couple of things quickly. First of all, I've started including tabs about the book that I'm talking about on the side, so you can get a bit of more information about the book itself. And as I mentioned in many videos previously, but maybe you're new, and you're welcome, first of all, if you're new. But if you are new, what I'm gonna usually do is I give you a proper synopsis of the book in my TPRs that I do at the beginning of the month, and then when I'm doing my wrap-ups, I will now aim to kind of give a one-sentence synopsis if I can, if it's appropriate, if a book is not very popular, or will give you a bit of more lengthy synopsis in case the book wasn't present in my initial TBR, so you know what the book is about. But if you already have seen this in my TBR, basically there is no need for me to just go through the plot again. So I just straight go into the review, apart from I guess one sentence review it's appropriate, it's a good balance rather than not giving you any information about the book, because you might not have checked the TBR as well. I hope you do, but if you don't, at least you'll have an idea. So that's my plan for the year. So let's start at number 10. So number 10, I have got a book that my copy is here somewhere, but it's a bit of a mess around me in the house at this moment in time, so I can't find my proper, actual physical copies. But I read this physically. It was a physical book in my hands, and this is The Little Demon. And this is the story of this man that aims to find the right match and marry someone in order to gain fortune. And things spiral down from there. Now, this has been sold to me initially as a horror. So I've heard someone reviewing this book very positively and kind of giving me the idea that this was a horror. And I don't think me and this person have read the same book. I think I must have read something else. This is a literature fiction / Russian classic. It's not horror, it's a literature fiction, not a good one, in my opinion. I have to say that unfortunately, although there was like a copy of from Penguin, I got this from Amazon and my copy royally sucked. Like, it was horrible. It was such a small writing. It appeared to be like such a small book, and when you go and look at the Penguin page, it's a 300 plus pages book, and mine was a 138. So they crammed all that writing in like half the pages that it was supposed to be. It was so tiny that by the end of that book, I honestly thought I should get my eyes checked, because I kept thinking something's wrong with my vision, something's wrong with my eyes, because I'm struggling so much. In reality, I realized compared to another book, it was written so small, and the edition just was horrible. This was also overall horribly confusing, a lot of names, scenes would jump from one to the other without giving you proper preparation or context of kind of warning that that was happening. And so you had to realize what was going on, and I kind of struggled through this basically. The only thing is that I read an article afterwards, and the author was kind of being accused from Russian politics and public, oh, you wrote a book about yourself. And he actually turned around and said, I actually wrote a book about you guys. So I really loved that this was supposed to be a satire, and the way he turned that kind of accusation around, I thought that was very clever. Unfortunately, I just wished that from just reading that book I could get that experience, I could have get the meaning behind his words, so the author words in reply to people accusing him. And unfortunately, like, although I love how he replied to them, I didn't see that during the book. I clearly don't have any prior knowledge of how Russian culture or politics works in this case, so of course I was going to this blind in a sense. Probably this would have made more sense if I had a knowledge of Russian culture and the political climate that was going on when he actually wrote this book. But yeah, not a good experience for me, unfortunately. Bad edition. Moving on. At number 9, we have The Madman's Daughter. This is the first in the trilogy, of YA, and I think it's a revisitation of Frankenstein, in which this girl is trying to seek the truth behind her father's ruined reputation of mad scientist. And so she goes on this travel, on this trip to try and find answers. I told you the synopsis was gonna be very vague because I did speak about that in the TBR, and this book had potential that unfortunately was soon wasted. First of all, you would think that with all the shit that our protagonist had going on, she would get her mind off, oh, which boy do I like more? And I never was bothered much about love triangles. It's not like something that bothers me that much, but I think there must be a right moment for you to pine after a guy. And I'm not saying that you can't have action and love at the same time, of course you can. Yet, if you're about to be eaten by something, you might just switch your thoughts from how hot the guy is, or oh, I should have kissed that one or the other one, from how do I get out of this situation, how do I not end up in the belly of this thing. And instead, like, I found the timing of her pining after these boys particularly unfortunate, basically. The father figure was appalling, and I think she didn't even try to make the father figure more interesting. Like, she didn't handle his unlikableness, if you want, subtly. It was very much out in your face. It was heavy handled, in my opinion. And yes, sometimes I would have appreciated if she had kind of constructed this character in a more fascinating way, more slowly, rather than immediately saying this guy is shit and there is not much else about him, basically. Because he had the potential again of being a very interesting character, you know, very mad scientist character if you want, but then there was a lot of madness, not much of a scientist, which I would have loved to see. So it has nothing to do with Frankenstein, like from, you know, Shelley, like nothing of that. Speaking of science, the science made absolutely no sense. Like, the science was shit. When basically you realize what's going on and the science behind what's going on, I was just like, really? Are you selling me this? Because I'm not buying it. So I was reading and I was like, I must have missed a crucial part. I could just try to go back and no, I didn't miss anything. It just didn't make sense. So yeah, basically disappointing read that probably will fade from my memory very quickly. And then I listened to this on audiobook. Actually, I started this in December and it was just, yeah, it's a number 8 because basically it took me ages to read this, and this is a true crime story about the murder of John Binet, and one of the detectives actually tried to solve the case and bring the persons responsible for her death to justice. And this was extremely lengthy as an audiobook. It was around 15 hours, which is my first kind of point against this, which is it was extremely lengthy, and for the amount of plot and content that actually this was covering, it was too lengthy. I did get the frustration of the author / detective, and I kind of, you know, I think he had done as a detective due diligence, and so you could feel the frustration of this man in saying, you know, I know who would done it. We have a pretty good idea of how things might have gone down, because there are not literally any other explanation for this murder and how it could have happened. So there was a lot of frustration to then kind of having all of that information and seeing these going nowhere, and seeing the people that were actually responsible never having to respond to that. And so it was overall disappointing. Not only as a read in itself, it was disappointing because, again, the length, but it was also ultimately disappointing because there is no closure, basically. So you listen to 15 hours and then the information that you received in the first half hour are basically repeated to you in different ways, roundabout ways if you want, but that was it. Basically there was no outcome. There was a lot of incompetence from the police in this. It was appalling how this case has been treated, how police treated the crime scene, how clues and any possible evidence was mistreated. Honestly, the police didn't come out well from this, not to mention the DA office. Like, let's not get into that one. And finally, it was so sad and felt very unjust that this 5-year-old girl had to suffer what she did and never received any justice, and how, you know, the message behind is that if you have money you can get away with a lot of shit. Unfortunately, it's true in a lot of cases, and this is one of those cases. And so yeah, it was overall very heavy as a content, very lengthy as a content, and very lengthy and repetitive as content, frustrating. And I honestly thought about leaving this and not finishing this, which is extremely rare for a true crime. A lot of the book takes actually place rather than the evidence and the prosecution or anything, but for the fact that there is no prosecution in this case, it's a lot of frustration of the author / detective again on dealing with the DA office and dealing with a lot of obstruction that were put in front of the police in trying to resolve this case. So actually, instead of having a deep insight in the case itself, you have a deep insight in kind of power struggles. This is not what I am interested in, basically, usually when I go into a true crime. Number 7, The Art of War. This is a classic book written, I think it's one of probably the oldest book I've ever read in my whole life, together probably with some very old Italian classics. It was written eons ago, basically. I really like my children copy, I think it's children copy, because it looks stunning. It looks amazing, and has pictures inside. And this is The Art of War, so basically it's kind of course it's a non-fiction, it's kind of military strategy book. And I found this actually quite interesting. I thought it would completely go over my head and I would not understand what was the content. I'm definitely not into military strategy, I don't know anything about military strategy, but actually this was very interesting and I could follow and understand what was going on, what he was saying. It made a lot of sense. Also, there was some very wise content, like some of the sentences he was saying were very wise and philosophical, and they made me think. And if I have to criticize something, it's the opposite way ever, it's actually that there was a lot of depth and philosophy behind those advice that this Sun Tzu gives us, but there was a bit of a lack and very vague military strategy in itself. So if I was a military general, I don't know how much I would get out of this apart from general broad ideas what to do and what not to do. I was expecting something more detailed, which is actually a really critique because it made more digestible the book for me, but I'd be curious to know how effective this would be in actual combat. Does it make sense? Like, it makes sense, but it doesn't go into the gritty, neat detail that I guess a military combatant, chief, whatever you want to call it depends also on the country you're fighting, will need. If it makes sense, I'd be curious to have a chat with them about this and if it's actually very, very useful as it looked for me, or it was too vague for actually being very practical for them, which is a question that will always keep with me because I don't think I'm gonna meet anybody. Shouldn't have done that. I don't think I'm gonna ever meet somebody that can actually answer those questions. At number 6, we have House of Chains. Sorry, today is one of those days where I can never hold the book properly. House of Chains. This is book number 4 in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I believe it's number 4. I hope it's number 4. This is one that I'm not going to attempt to synopsis, guys. It's an epic fantasy. It's very famous. And I think that even if you go and read the synopsis online, or if I try to explain to you, this book is not actually about that. This is such a complex world made of so many layers, so many characters. Sometimes you don't even follow them for books. It's a bit of like Game of Thrones in a sense, where some books you don't follow certain characters in all books. Like certain characters are in one book and other characters are in another book and different parts of the world. That kind of premise, basically. So at the beginning, in the first 700 pages out of 1,200, I believe, there was chaos, utter confusion. Like, I never did any drugs in my life, but reading these felt like I would imagine be on magic mushrooms, basically, where you are like, everything is spinning, you don't know where you are, you don't know what's real and what's not, you are not sure what you are witnessing, in this case what I was reading about, who I was reading about, total confusion. By the end, so when I reached the 700 page and I was stubborn and didn't give up, I could start to see threads for certain characters specifically coming together, and especially I think threads that we will see coming together in further books. And at that point, some sparks of recognition came in my brain, just like, oh, that's that character you read about in book number 2, for example. So I had a faint recollection and I could see a bit of seeds planted for future adventures. But it took me 700 pages plus, probably. So yeah, must be said, I think these editions are too confusing. Like, I think the way I understand why people love this. I am overall someone who's enjoying the saga in itself, and I can respect what he's doing, but he could have chosen a way that is a bit less confusing. Even structuring the book itself, like for example putting titles with which character you're following at the beginning of a chapter, would help a lot. And I understand that in each chapter you follow, you know, maybe 2 to 3 characters, but all the time there is one main protagonist, almost all the time. So you could have just chosen, you know, oh, Sam, Joyce, whatever it is, at the beginning of the chapter, so we would know at least what to expect, and by the time we reach 700 pages we know the cast of characters. So I think the way this book is structured, they could have made an effort to make it more readable for like a vaster audience. Maybe they don't care, but I think there were ways, even just the publishing company, to make this a bit more clear. Some of these characters were quite hilarious, so I had a good time overall about reading it. Like, I don't mind his writing. I am committed to finish this series, getting to the end, although I made peace with myself that I will miss a lot of things in this, especially upon the first read. Will I ever reread this? Possibly, I don't know. Let's see how it finishes. Let's see if it's, you know, it doesn't become too much of a task. Eventually I'm gonna finish the series, but I'm okay with probably not grasping everything. I think this would be, well, an amazing TV show. You know? Netflix, Amazon, Apple TV, whatever is listening, probably no one, but you know, just, yeah. This one, yeah. At number 5 we have Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. This was the adult fairy book that came in the month of December, I believe. So I've done an unboxing for it if you want to see inside. And this is a historical alternative history fantasy where you've got this girl trying to put together an encyclopedia of fairies that in this world are real. So she goes explore the world in order to find the folklore of these fairies and discover new fairies and interact with them, so just she can compile this anthology about them. And these, first of all, had amazing writing, like amazing, whimsical, such skillful writing that made me feel like fluffy just reading it. You know, those kind of description that really made you picture the food, that made you picture, in this case, the weather. The weather was so depicted in such a way because it takes place in like kind of Norway, Scandinavian areas. Like the details and the description of the landscape and the weather were so detailed and so well done that I felt like I was there. I found also this quite funny. I really love the dynamics between Wendell, Bumblebee, the male protagonist of this has got the most hilarious name ever, and the main protagonist. I thought they were so cute, like their dynamics. And I also appreciate the fact that there is an element of romance, but it's not heavy-handed in this at all. But also, like, these two characters, they know each other already when you start the book. So their relationship makes a lot of sense because it's not built in this, it's just continued in this. And it's not confusing at all. So don't be put off by the fact that they already know each other. Everything is very clear and actually flows very nicely. And it's not my general fantasy. I must admit that this kind of slow, more explorative fantasy, it's something that I'm starting now to read more, but it's not my favorite kind. However, between her writing and the fact that I became so attached to these two characters, I will continue on with the series, and overall I had a very good experience reading these. At number 4 I have Elmouth, and this is a short story that I listen on audio, and I would describe this as a medieval horror fantasy. You follow this bunch of medieval mercenaries. That's the vibe that I got out of that. Basically given the task of exploring this town and castle where very weird stuff, very creepy, sinister things have happened and someone has gone missing. So they need to go there and find out what's going on and find this person. Now, this was so well written, in my opinion, that it's a bit wasted on audio. I wished I could have a physical copy, and I will be on the lookout for actually a physical copy of this if it's not too expensive, because I think that the writing is so rich that it can be fully appreciated by writing a physical copy. The narrator was so good. I don't want to give any spoilers, but he changes his intonations and he changes his voice according to the character, and toward the end he made a voice of someone, let's say, and it creeped me out. I was just like washing the dishes while listening to this and it just jumped. So that was so good. He was a very talented narrator. This is definitely my kind of horror fantasy. I love this kind of story. So it was a very, very solid novella. I just wished there was more. I just wished that it was longer. Said that, it's very well done. It's very self-contained. So you don't feel like, if I just wished it was longer because I love the genre, if it makes sense. And number 3, I have Before I Go to Sleep. Now, this is just the Italian version, but it's Before I Go to Sleep. Just so you know, I'm holding this up, but it's this book here. And this is a thriller where you follow the story of this woman. She is basically unable to retain memories once she goes to bed for a certain period of time. So if she has a nap, she will remember, but if she goes and sleeps throughout the night, the next day she wakes up and she has forgotten where she is, what happened to her in the last 20 years of her life. So her memory sometimes starts when she was a teenager, sometimes when she's in her early 20s, but she can't retain anything past her early 20s when she has this big accident happening to her. So she wakes up every morning married to this man, and every time he has to explain to her, I'm your husband, this is what happened to you, you're a middle-aged woman now, 45, almost middle-aged. So yeah, and you kind of follow her trying to retrace her story and what happened in the accident in her 20s that led her to then lose her memory. Now, I'll start with what I didn't like about these. Didn't like, maybe that's the wrong term, that I didn't love about this is the writing. I think the writing, or the way it's translated, it's very simple, nothing special. The prose is pretty unremarkable. All of the rest I really enjoyed. I think the tension was built very well. I was honestly I was gripped, always asking myself what had happened, always coming up with theories, and in the end I was surprised the way she twists this story. And because the cast of characters is very limited, I think it takes a bit of skills in doing what she does in this book, because you don't have a big cast of characters, so the options are somewhat limited, and yet she does wonderful things with that. So I was very impressed, and I will check out more thrillers by her. I want to check out the movie. I think someone was nominated for an Oscar in that movie, and then Nicole Kidman plays the main protagonist, so I'm curious to check out the movie, although now I know what's going on. Maybe I can check out the movie with someone who has never read the book and see how it translated, and if I can guess right what's happening. But yeah, pleasantly surprised, very quick, intriguing thriller. And then at second place, I decided to continue on and listen to the Red Rising saga. I don't know how it's called, but basically I listened to the second book, Golden Sun. I had listened to Red Rising, I think in 2021 or 2022, I don't remember. I listened to this on audio because sci-fi fantasy, it's never something that I actively reach out for much, especially at the time. So at the time I was like, this is very popular, but it doesn't sound like my cup of tea, so let me try and listen to the first book. And it was okay, and I never felt the pull of continuing immediately. And now I've seen people keep talking about this and how it actually improves the series in the other books, so I said, okay, let's listen to the second book and so on. And yeah, I listened to Golden Sun and really enjoyed it way more than I did the first book. I had to refresh my memory a bit on the first as well, because I've forgotten a bunch of stuff, but I retained enough to be able to listen to this and really appreciate it. This was very dramatic, in a very good way, but very dramatic. And it was just very upsetting in a sense, seeing all of these events unfold. There is no quiet moment in this, like zero, and it's pretty lengthy audiobook. It was probably around 18 hours, and it's like, the time is, I kind of sped up the time a bit. I listened to the speed of 1.2, so it was still 18 hours. So it was very lengthy, no rest for the wicked. And I felt honestly exhausted by going through the process of listening to all that was happening to these characters and all that they go through. It was intense. I'm very grateful that I decided to continue on, and I agree 100% with what other people say, that with this series, you have to read the second book before you can decide if it's for you or not, because it's such like a different vibe in a sense that the first book was. It's so different, it's so much more. Now, I'm not saying that everybody will love this, but I think in order to really properly make up your mind, you have to get to book number 2 and read book number 2, and then you can make your judgment. So I'm glad I did. I will continue on. I don't still feel at this moment in time the need of having a physical copy, which is just something that keeps me, that's the reason why it's in second place. This is why it's not a perfect 5 stars, because usually a book that I was so engrossed about, I would just go and buy the physical copy, and for whatever reason I don't feel the impulse of doing it. Although there are some very nice like copies out there, and I don't know, for now I'm gonna listen to the third one and then judge, and I know that the series has eventually continued on. And must be said that this protagonist is so kick-ass. Like, Darrow is such a kick-ass character. I would, again, another one that I would love to watch the movie of, and Just FYI though, there's a lot of puking in this. Like if you are triggered by puking, people puking, there is a lot of people puking in this. Number 1, it's actually my book club for the month, and that was The Wolf Den. This is a historical fiction that was picked by one of my book club fellows, and it's the story of this slave turned prostitute in Pompeii. So she is originally Greek, and then she is sold into slavery and acquired by a man, Felix, that runs a brothel, and she has to survive in this new country, and she has to survive, you know, being a sex worker and being used and abused by people, and you kind of follow her trying to survive. And it's a trilogy, and immediately as soon as I finished this I went and ordered the sequel. It was so good. This was definitely a novelty for me. I don't think I've ever read a fictional story about someone who's a sex worker, someone in this case that it's enslaved. So it's a historical fiction but told from a sex worker perspective. Actually, I did read one many years ago, and it was one of my favorite books growing up as a teen. I mean, it was Funny by Erica Jong. I loved that. If I remember correctly, she at one point worked as a sex worker in that book. So that's the only other book that I can remember. And you know, reading this book about this woman enslaved and forced into sex work, it was very new for me, and I really enjoyed also writing. I have been to Pompeii. I love Pompeii, so that really helps. By the way, if you're going to Italy, Pompeii is definitely something that you might want to check out. If you don't know, Pompeii is a very famous city in Italy, where I think this takes place in 74 AD. In 79 AD, if I'm correct with the dates, Pompeii is a city that was covered by the eruption of a volcano. So the volcano erupts and kills thousands of people, especially in this town, Pompeii, and you can still see them if you go there, because basically they become kind of stone. It's a very famous town. If you look it up online, you'll find it, and you can still see the town is being preserved and humans have been preserved. Basically became stone because of, you know, the eruption from the volcano. So historically, this takes place in a very important time in Italy, and the place I have been, and you kind of follow this sort of unlikable character if you want, but I really found her intriguing and I really found her fascinating, because it's that kind of self-centered behavior that you see from survivors, and I really appreciated that. Actually, I appreciate that for once we follow someone who's surviving, even if sometimes she has to kind of step on others. She doesn't really step on others, but sometimes she has to focus exclusively on herself, and I found her realistic, believable in the context that she's living in. And the relationship with Felix owns these girls, her relationship with the other girls, and the way she represents the selfishness that sometimes you have to survive in certain situations in life. So I really loved the story that she crafted with the characters and the relationships that she crafted, the author, in this book. The only thing that bugged me tiny bit in the wrong way was the fact that one of the kids, it's a young man actually that is enslaved as well in the brothel with them, is actually a boy, and because he is very aggressive, he is treated by them very poorly, rather understood. So he's in the same situation as they are, but because he's a male, he's not treated with any compassion. Like sometimes the protagonist, she tries, but she doesn't really get enough there. She doesn't really make the extra effort or understanding why this young boy, almost a kid basically, who is a sex worker, is forced into performing sex for people, and how he could be so sour, how he could be so angry with the world. And I don't know, I just felt there could have been a bit more understanding. So I really hope that this boy, because of what happens at one point, is not just used in this story. I really hope that there is hope for this boy, or at least that this boy is understood more and treated with a bit more in depth. Basically, it's not just put on the side of one of the evil figures in this book, because actually he's a survivor himself. He is someone who is suffering, tremendously throughout these, as the girls are, and I really hope it's not just a tool to just move certain parts of the plot forward. I hope we go back to him eventually in the other two books, and because of the way this ends, I really want to know. But thank you guys, let me know what you've read this month. I would love to chat about your favorite reads in the comments down below. And if you're new, I would love for you to subscribe. I post things about books as well as comics, and yeah, please say hi in the comments down below if you're new. I will see you next time. Thank you again for watching. Ciao!